Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Savannah Sullivan, the Climate Policy Director at Green Umbrella. Today's event, Climate Equity Strategies from the U.S. Cities and Beyond, is our 7th webinar in our Regional Climate Action Lunch and Learn series, and the last webinar before our Regional Climate Collaborative launch, which is tomorrow at 1 p.m. I'll talk a bit more about that at the end of today's presentation. But today, my colleague Tyeisha and I will be digging into a climate equity report that we recently completed, and it was commissioned by the City of Cincinnati. We're fortunate to be joined today by Kroner, the Sustainability Manager from the City of Cincinnati's Office of Environment and Sustainability, and he'll be talking about the history of this work and how this information will support the next Green Cincinnati Plan. I'll then wrap up by sharing how these findings will support regional efforts and some next steps. And also feel free to stick around for an optional Q&A from 12:30 to 1. We'll be here to answer any of your questions. So just a bit of background, the Climate Policy Program at Green Umbrella, we work to foster coordination across our regional institutions on sustainability and policy and elevate these needs to state, federal, and philanthropic opportunities in order to draw on resources and implement programming. We have 4 primary goals, as you can see, and we serve a 10-county region in Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. And as you can guess from today's title, we'll be focusing on goal number 2, centering equity in climate planning. Before we dig in, I wanted to first introduce the types of equity and some principles connected to equitable community engagement. So first is recognition. This is the act of identifying and acknowledging injustices affecting specific populations. So how are we accounting for stakeholder norms, values, expertise? And I like to think of this as asking, what is the context and how are problems being characterized and communicated, including historical information, data, current resident experiences, and more. As shown in the image to the right, this really is the foundation and the strong roots of doing this work. Procedural equity is about addressing power structures and access to participation in decision-making. And a key to this is ensuring inclusive and meaningful engagement and asking how our engagement shifts power, builds trust, and ensures accountability both structurally and intergenerationally. Distributional equity is the act of addressing the actual distribution of burdens and benefits across different populations in a community. So I like to think of this as asking, what are the projects, the programs, and the policies we're implementing in communities, and asking, do they include the language and the mechanisms that speak most directly to the needs of our most vulnerable populations? Next is restorative equity, and this means making a commitment to correct past harms and facilitate repair from those harms. So not only is it crucial to understand what the harms are and why they're happening, we must address them head on and ensure the harm doesn't happen again in the future. Last but not least is transformative equity, and this is addressing structural conditions while facilitating that repair I just mentioned, and cultivating accountability. So I like to think of this as asking, how are we shifting the culture around doing this work so that we're not perpetuating harmful outcomes in the status quo as we keep creating new plans, programs, and policies? And so next, I'm going to pass it to Kroner, the Sustainability Manager at the City of Cincinnati, and he's going to share a bit about how this work that preceded the report Green Umbrella wrote got started.
Thank you, Savannah. Thanks for pulling this together today, and thanks for all you and Green Umbrella are doing to support this work. I'm Kroner with the City of Cincinnati's Office of Environment and Sustainability. We are primarily focused on climate crisis, how it will impact city government and our operations, how it will impact quality of life for the people who live here, and then what we're going to do about it. And when we look into the future and anticipate the challenges ahead, we don't have to look very hard or very far to understand that the crisis impacts different communities differently, different households differently. First, because the climate crisis presents in different communities differently. And secondly, because different households, different individuals are prepared differently for the challenges ahead. So to help us better understand what this looks like moving forward, we partnered with Green Umbrella, Groundwork Ohio River Valley, the University of Cincinnati, and a group called Adaptation International to commission our first ever Climate Equity Indicators report. And this report looks at, one, the risks that communities face, whether that's urban heat, whether that's stormwater, whether that's air quality issues. And number two, how those households are prepared or underprepared for the challenges. The report looks at 55 different metrics, looking at risk and some household attributes that include socioeconomics, public health data, social cohesion, which is a proxy for how well prepared a community is to work together to address a crisis. It maps all of those in a way that compares one community to another. So to give you an example of what this can look like, we have our urban heat island data here on the left, a map that shows on one summer day, a 10-degree difference in how hot some parts of our city get compared to the light blue cooler parts of our community. You might think about how this impacts households without air conditioning, households who are dealing with health issues or respiratory issues. But then what are we going to do about it? So when we compare the distribution of the heat emergency to the distribution of our tree canopy cover in the city of Cincinnati, we can see some clear parallels here. You can see deep red pockets in parts of our city that are underserved by the tree canopy. So clearly there's some correlation between development and tree canopy and the way urban heat islands present across our city. So this lets us design programs and policies to target these communities with 10% or less tree canopy, with resources to make sure that they are seeing trees planted in their community in places most in need. And so this is one example of how we can begin to design climate programs based on these climate equity indicators. Cincinnati thinks about this big picture. And since 2008, we have been doing climate action planning. As you all know, the science and the politics of climate action have evolved over time, and we have found the need to update on a 5-year rhythm to keep pace with these changes. And here we are in 2022 anticipating our 2023 Green Cincinnati Plan, but that was not a surprise. So we've been doing a lot of work in the background to prepare. If you would advance the slide, I think there's some graphics here. Thank you. One more. So in the background, as we set the stage for 2023, we have been engaging with our community partners in an effort we call Climate Safe Neighborhoods. Hopefully you have seen some of this activity in the news or on the city's website or Green Umbrella's website or Groundwork's website. This work is based on the idea that the climate crisis is presenting in different communities differently, and the people closest to the challenges are also closest to the solutions. So these are workshops where we work closely with community members to understand the language they're using to describe the crisis, the way their households are experiencing this, and what they see as the primary solutions moving forward. Born from that was our Climate Equity Indicators report, published in 2021, gives us a foundational data set to think about how we do climate equity planning in preparation for 2023 Green Cincinnati Plan. And then as Savannah teed up, we commissioned a report from Green Umbrella looking at climate equity strategies from across the country, what peer cities are doing to approach this work in their climate action strategies. So I'll hand it back to Savannah to get into that work.
Great. Thanks so much, Ollie. So yes, this is the grand reveal of our benchmarking analysis. Through this effort, as Ollie mentioned, we produced a lot of information that will be helpful in shaping not only the Green Cincinnati Plan, but also regional efforts across multiple communities in Greater Cincinnati. And so we produced 2 deliverables. And when I say we, this is the climate policy team, myself and Tyeisha, who you'll hear from next. but we produced 2 deliverables, a database that has more than 350 equitable climate action strategies pulled from 20 US cities, as well as some additional case studies, as well as a report that clusters our research by forms of equity and specific themes that we observed. And so we provide case studies and guiding questions that parallel those themes and parallel those forms of equity that I presented on earlier in order to help readers to begin to brainstorm additional local action possibilities here. And so some of this work and the clustering that we did was really guided by core competencies from some key leading national groups, including the Institute for Sustainable Communities, the Georgetown Climate Center, and more, which have made great strides and efforts for local government practitioners and partners in order to organize our thoughts around how do we do climate action work equitably. And this is really important because I think, as Ollie mentioned, we've progressed every 5 years with the Green Cincinnati Plan, for example. And in 2018, we, for the first time, identified equity and justice as a key component and a key pillar. But I think there's still a lot of questions as this work always evolves of what does it actually mean to then operationalize our equitable goals. And so now I'm going to pass it to Tyeisha, the Climate Policy Coordinator at Green Umbrella, to dig in some of the details on this report.
Great. Thank you, Savannah. Yeah, this report, it was really awesome to participate in, and I'm so happy to be sharing this with everyone today. And so again, we focused on 8 focus areas or categories that were selected as strategies from cities that use SMARTY goals to guide their recommendations. And so these 8 categories that you can see on the screen today were inspired by the focus areas that the Green Cincinnati Plan aims to use in our new plan. And SMARTY, by the way, stands for strategic, measurable, ambitious, realistic, time-bound, inclusive, and equitable. And we just wanted to make sure that we use those types of strategies because there have been plans written in the past from various cities that are included in this study that didn't have any accountability tied to them or any transparency tied to them. And so, yep, advocacy, education and outreach, buildings and energy, city operations, food, natural environment, resilience, zero waste, and mobility were the 8 focus areas that we focused on. And so again, we can't share everything in this presentation today, but I wanted to dive in and give you a few themes from each equity type that were included in the benchmarking analysis. So we'll start with recognition. A lot of cities are starting to acknowledge the injustices of Black, Indigenous, people of color, or BIPOC for short, community members. Providence, Rhode Island, they produced a report called A Matter of Truth, where they went very much in detail about the injustices against African people and Indigenous people from hundreds of years ago and today. And so that's really important for building trust with the community members that we're trying to establish relationships with so that they can know that things will be different this time around. Procedural equity, an example was the formation of equity-centered offices. In Oakland, California, they established a Department of Race and Equity and started using a tool to ensure that all the policies and programs in the future incorporated race and equity into everything that they did to ensure that, again, it was inclusive of all community members. Distributional equity, a theme that popped up a lot was the deployment of targeted universalism. And targeted universalism is simply when a program is established with universal goals, but they target a very specific population to ensure that everyone can reap the benefits that maybe the majority has already been fortunate enough to participate in. So an example was in Tucson, Arizona. They just launched their new green infrastructure stormwater management fee based program. And so essentially they're charging $1 per household if you are a single family owner for the year, up to 3 years, I believe. And that's going to generate about $3 million for green infrastructure and tree canopy projects across the city. If you are a qualified low-income resident or community member, you are exempt from the program because we're focusing on equity. And yeah, that's going to be really helpful in the city of Tucson because they have so many heat-related deaths each summer due to the fact that there is very little tree equity in the city. And then one of my favorite themes was the reclamation of degraded land. So Houston, Texas, they just launched the nation's largest community solar project on a brownfield that's 240 acres. It's going to include a job trainings component, walking trails, biking trails, community solar again, so that the residents can lower their energy bills. And it's just a beautiful example of taking unusable land and turning it into such a community asset in the future. And last but not least is transformative equity. Kamikatsu Japan, we had to pull them into the report. They have become a beacon of zero waste policy where they're diverting 80% or more of their resources from landfill. And this is being done by like a group of 1,500 residents. Most of them are senior citizens. So I thought that was pretty impressive. We can go to the next slide. Yep. And so again, we can't cover them all today, but I chose to focus on mobility for the presentation. The Twin Cities up in Minnesota, they wanted to ensure, like other cities, that people were able to participate in the EV transportation wave that we're seeing across the country. But most of the time, if you're not a homeowner or at that income bracket, you cannot afford electric vehicles. And so there they had a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, and just to ensure that there was equitable access to EV charging stations. So they made sure that the charging stations were located in low-income communities that generally would not have been able to participate in the past. And so DOE, yep, as you can see, awarded $6.7 million to these two partners, and folks are able to drive EVs around the city now. We can go to the, Yep, and then a resilience theme, two of them, has been the deployment of resilience hubs. Resilience hubs can include like backup power, water filtration, community kitchens, solar powered refrigerators for folks who need to store their medications. It can be, essentially just a safe space when climate disasters do happen and you may not be able to leave your community. So that's been a theme that we've been seeing across the country. This example was just from Miami-Dade County in Florida, where they established the first mobile unit in the US from a retrofitted shipping container. I thought that was awesome. And then New York City, of course, we know, has millions of people, and it has a huge issue with stormwater management, combined sewer overflows and things of that nature. So they established an incentive, like other cities are doing across the country, where they are promoting decentralized black water systems. And that just means you're able to capture and recycle all of the water inside of your building and use it for toilet flushing, washing clothes, things of that nature. It's a very forward-thinking technology that finally cities are starting to take advantage of. So that was just a case study in New York City, where the payback was going to be between 10 and 15 years. And so think about if more cities and more office buildings took advantage of that, we would likely see less flooding in residential homes as well. And then finally, I just wanted to cover a little bit about some of the creative funding mechanisms that cities are starting to use, because this isn't the first time that cities have produced sustainability plans, but often one of the issues is that we're not able to fund some of the projects, some of the innovative strategies there. So Portland, Oregon in 2018, they voted to pass essentially what's called like a big box retailer fee, where if that big box retailer grosses more than $1 billion a year, they would be charged 1% sales tax on all of their receipts. And if they were a local retailer, they would making at least $500,000, they would participate in the program as well. From that alone, Portland has been able to pull in between 40 plus and 60 plus $1 million annually, and make sure that they're able to sustain those energy efficiency, equity focused programs and projects, across the city, instead of not having the funds to do what they wanted to do in the first place. And then there's a bill being worked on, being passed in the state of Illinois, essentially charging pollution producing facilities up to $200,000 annually, so that they can use those funds to pay for environmental justice projects in those frontline communities that see a lot of pollution. And so there are more like in the report, but yep, Savannah linked it. And so feel free to check it out. You only have limited time today, but thank you. And I'll pass this off back to Ollie to talk more about the Green Cincinnati Plan of 2023.
Thank you, Ty. So now the challenge before us is to incorporate all this work locally. So in March, the mayor introduced a motion to update the Green Cincinnati Plan and appointed a steering committee to help guide the process. So you see a photo of this committee here. And in fact, I see Nathan Alley is on the call today. He's one of the thought leaders giving shape to all of this. The steering committee is helping us with key strategic approach, identifying key themes, key pillars, and helping us understand how to engage with the communities that they represent. Next slide, please. When we think about key pillars, they have passed a motion that we focus on sustainability and addressing the carbon that is driving this crisis, focus on resilience, which is anticipating and enduring and growing in a future that looks different than the past, and equity, which has been elaborated on here today. So we're looking for the sweet spots in these recommendations, how these three areas overlap, and we move forward with climate action. Next slide, please. But when we talk about equity, we know we have to make good on it. And at the center of the process is procedural equity. So guided by our steering committee, we are embarking on a very ambitious community engagement strategy. So the steering committee has multiple subcommittees, one of which is our equity committee. And Savannah and Ty support that work. And this analysis that they've done is giving shape to an equity framework. And that equity framework asks a series of key questions to help make sure that we're considering all aspects that have been identified, everything from procedural to distributional to recognition justice in the development of this plan. Armed with the framework, we have subcommittees focusing on our own city operations, focusing on our buildings and energy grid, focusing on food systems and food waste, focusing on natural systems and green infrastructure, focusing on mobility and transportation, education and outreach, resilience planning, and zero waste and circular economy thinking. We're structuring this in 3 rounds. So first and foremost, we held a giant kickoff at the Cincinnati Zoo at the end of end of May. I imagine some of you were there. We did a round robin where we asked all of the 300 participants to move through these different subcommittees and provide their best recommendations for addressing these issues in Cincinnati, and also help us identify key barriers and key stakeholders we need to engage. With all of that input, that's thousands of ideas, we are now working to refine those and move forward into our next meeting of each of these subcommittees to prioritize and refine into what will be considered at our third subcommittee meeting, which we hope will get us to a point where we have a final high impact, high feasibility strategies to address sustainability, equity, and resilience moving forward in Cincinnati. And then we've talked about the climate safe neighborhoods work. These community engagement series are happening alongside this process, and we're working to integrate that thematic input into each round of subcommittee meetings. This is all still taking shape, and it's still plenty of opportunity for you all to be engaged if you would like. Next slide, please. So at this stage, I don't know how many thousands of ideas we have collected, but our office here in city government is working to extract the key themes to move forward into this next round of subcommittee meetings. Subcommittees will be asked to prioritize those into high impact strategies and then take them into finalization. One of the key tools that we'll be using, we are piloting a platform called CitizenLab, which is an online place where you can go to see what this process looks like, see the different streams of input, see how these themes of equity are being incorporated into the development of the plan. There is a survey there where you can give us your thoughts on what the climate crisis looks like to you in your neighborhood, and also opportunity for you to share what you believe to be key priorities we should focus on. So we will be revealing that platform here in the very near future, and invite you to engage online or in person in these subcommittee meetings. Back to you, Jiu.
Thank you so much, Ollie. It's always so fun. I mean, I've heard this process, a number of times now, but I always get excited hearing about how it's all coming together. So the last thing we just wanted to share here before we move into Q&A is that Green Umbrella is dedicated to expanding this work, not only within Cincinnati, but to our communities in the greater Cincinnati region. So 4 southwestern Ohio counties, 4 northern Kentucky counties, and 2 southeast Indiana counties. Not only all of the sort of equity-focused work that we covered today, but a number of other key issues that we've heard from local communities, including the need to build up local capacity within local governments, raise awareness of these issues, connect about solutions, and really build political will amongst elected officials that also play a key role in this work. So to that end, we hope that you will also join Green Umbrella tomorrow for the launch of our Regional Climate Collaborative. And what a Regional Climate Collaborative is a network primarily that will support regional governments, organizations, and their communities to design and implement equitable climate solutions across our region. And so this is open to governments, community-based organizations, businesses, community members, academia. But this effort is really focused on policies and public sector action, and it takes a village, like you heard from Ollie and Tyeisha. It really takes all sectors to encourage our local and regional government officials to kickstart and accelerate their climate action efforts. We have an exciting round of speakers, national organizations, including the World Resources Institute, the Georgetown Climate Center, the Institute for Sustainable Communities, and we'll also feature a round robin of regional partners who have taken great strides and are great shining examples of not only the equitable climate action work I mentioned, but building political will, expanding local capacity, and we'll be announcing how Green Umbrella will be unveiling programming dedicated to all of these issues. And so it should be a really great event. We hope you'll join. You can register in the link that I just dropped in the chat. And we hope that if you are in person in Greater Cincinnati tomorrow, that you'll also join us for a celebration at Braxton Brewing in Covington, Kentucky, for our monthly green drinks. This month it will focus on the Regional Climate Collaborative. Starting at 4:30, we will be leading a joint tour with the city of Covington to walk around and see some of their really awesome resilience projects that they've gotten off the ground over the last several years. And then we will end again at Braxton Brewing at 5:30 for a round of drinks and regional climate collaborative announcements. So hope you will join us for the fun. And with that, I will pause our recording and our presentation and take any questions that the audience has.